Kia ora.
Oh,
So welcome along to the AI framework presentation. In this presentation, we're going to run through briefly the AI framework that has been developed by NZGTTA, DTTA, the Digital Technology Teachers Aotearoa, and funded and supported under the Network of Expertise funding. The AI framework came about from a need that we saw for guidance and support in regards to artificial intelligence for our teachers and our digital technology teachers, and then technology teachers, and then more widely, everybody else as a result of the emergence of generative AI and as it exploded all over us last year in 2024. We've brought together a whole group of people representing tangata whenua, the universities. We had the big three companies come and play with us. So we had Microsoft, Apple, and Google come in and contribute. And then we had teachers from primary school and kuras right up to universities who were coming and supporting us and giving us ideas. And from that, we ended up developing our AI framework. It's worthwhile when we think about AI to think about the level of usage we have of artificial intelligence and how wide it's become and how broadly used. And pretty much any product we see these days is going to have AI enabled somewhere tucked in it. Whether or not it actually means much is a different matter. But what we do know from people like Perceptive when they did their survey is that 47% of New Zealanders, when this was first done, or as currently done, are using AI compared to 2023 when it's 24%. And the proportion of males and females who are using it is increasing drastically. Oh, we're going the wrong way. And also that the adoption is going broadly across the board. So we're seeing more and more of our people using this, and particularly our young people. And there's a huge number of them who are adopting this technology very, very quickly and often without any guidance. If we look at some of the research coming out from places like Stanford, they do an annual artificial intelligence report. And two of their key findings was that AI is increasingly embedded in everyday life and that AI is becoming more efficient, affordable, and definitely more accessible. And this is both a huge step for us, but it's also a bit of a risk as well, because it can pose some fairly severe challenges. One of the questions that we ask when we run the session is how many of us are actually paying for a subscription for our artificial intelligence? And I know that the majority of people aren't. I know my school, we have some people who are on a full paid subscription, but I'm yet to hear of a school that's fully paid for a subscription to a professional level AI for their students. And 90% plus of schools don't have any degree of professional subscription, which raises the question, and I guess it comes to the point that Tristan Harris made, which is if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product because we have to pay for it in some way. The power cost alone of artificial intelligence is enormous. The technology involved in it, the price that people are paying with this is absolutely phenomenal. The companies have to make their money back in some way. So it begs the question about what are we paying with? And obviously it's the questions that we're putting in, it's the information we're uploading and what we're sharing with artificial intelligence in the same way that Google operates as a data mining company. You're pouring information into Google and it's using it to target marketing, to look at trends, and to do the stuff that Google does really well. And For me, that raises the question of how comfortable do you actually feel with your artificial intelligence and the ones that you're using, the ones that are potentially listening to you as you're talking in your room. Because most of us now will have HomePods or Cortana or any of the other artificial intelligence home devices sitting in here. Plus, we have artificial intelligence built into our Macs and our PCs with Copilot and Siri. So, how comfortable are we with this? When we ask that question, the majority of people are saying, well, if 5 fingers was very, very comfortable and 1 finger was extremely uncomfortable, most people are sitting at about 3. And that's echoed in a much broader sense, more than just our technologists and our digital technologists. The AI Trust Report is showing the same thing. And this one is commissioned by Vodafone. And when we start looking at some of the things about trust, 67% of Kiwis are worried about the misuse of their personal data. 62% are concerned about unfair or incorrect decision making. But most Kiwis are also seeing artificial intelligence as having huge potential. The importance of trust comes through as well in these. We know, and the ministry will admit to it, that they're struggling to provide us with guidance. We've been asking for it. We know that to get through and to be approved takes process and time. The ministry is working on artificial intelligence, but actually it's probably not at a speed that's quick enough to solve a lot of the problems that we're having. Our starting point for our discussions was the framework that Australia developed for its schools. They produced this about the end of 2024. Threw it out there for people to go and look at. It had been originally started in 2023. It's got some really good, strong points. However, it is designed for an Australian culture and an Australian environment, and particularly its levels of biculturalness that we in New Zealand celebrate aren't being represented there. But it was a very interesting starting point, and when we got together, this was one of the things that we quickly went and said, no, this doesn't quite fit for New Zealand. So instead, we developed our own framework for education, and we're going to look a little bit at that as we go through. The framework is a tool for school leaders, and then supporting underneath it is a classroom framework as well, where we're supporting teachers to make informed decisions, and we're providing both teachers and students with a set of resources that is really beneficial for them, so they're able to actually go through and have posters and materials that they can use in their classrooms and have a consistent approach across the board. So the framework itself, the decision-making tool, we collect in a whole lot of information about the actual artificial intelligences you're considering putting into your school. You look at the cost model for it, whether there's a subscription, what are the things that they provide in the way of policies, is there a help desk, what level of support can get? Also, what's the jurisdiction of the AI? Where is it actually being held? Because there are ramifications with that. For example, if we have data that is being held in the United States, anything that's held on a US server can be subpoenaed by the US Justice Department. If we are in China, then it is entirely possible that similar data will be being used by Chinese intelligence. So looking at the jurisdiction that these are in is quite significant. This is the sort of thing that we often get our IT managers at school if we're lucky enough to have one of them in there. And then the foundations for the framework start with the Privacy Act, the Copyright Act, and the Harmful Digital Communications Act. Then we build on those to go through and start looking at the different lenses that bring everything together. Now, the Privacy Act is great. It comes through and provides us with one of the most comprehensive sets of privacy tools on the planet. It's equivalent of the general data protection stuff coming out of Europe. It's very, very useful, but it's also quite challenging in an artificial intelligence context. The Copyright Act for New Zealand comes along and sets a series of guidelines that explain how published content can be used and can't be used. And the Harmful Digital Communications Act provides this degree of protection. We have 4 PO, or 4 pillars, that we use for this, and these are our lenses that we're going to look through. So we have Manaaki, Ako, Wānanga, and Kaitiakitanga. We bring all of this together in a framework underneath the Education Act. One of the first questions we need to ask is, how are you going to use your data, and are you going to use it within an artificial intelligence? And if you are using it within there, then you need to go and address the 13 principles of the Privacy Act. Now, the 13 principles themselves require us to inform individuals that their data is being used. We have to have a legal method of collecting it. We have to be able to look at the storage and security of the data. But more importantly, the Privacy Act in New Zealand means that you have to allow people the ability to access their data, to correct it, and ensure that it is accurate before it's being used, and also set retention on how long we can use this data for. Now, that poses a big problem, because how do you go into an artificial intelligence and say, show me all the data on somebody, I need to go and correct it, or have that right to be forgotten and deleting it? The use of personal information should also, or is also, restricted to the purpose that it's designed or being collected for, which poses another problem, because in a general purpose artificial intelligence, that could be used for anything. Who it's disclosed to is also challenging, because again, unless you have really strong guardrails and it's basically closed off so you're the only people who can use it, this information can go global. The last 2 ones, the disclosure outside of New Zealand, is very interesting, because any company that we are putting this information into must agree to New Zealand's privacy laws. And the one that everybody gets, but often poses a problem, is unique identifiers. We go through and we change those, and we think, well, probably I've covered all the stuff for privacy, but actually that's the last step in 13. There are an assortment of privacy tools that we've seen, or AI tools that have been rolled out, that have caused us privacy issues. Not the least of which was one which Microsoft came up with, which was screenshotting everything on your screen every 30 seconds or so, and then storing it. But the idea behind it, a quite laudable one, of being able to make it easy to recall everything that had been happening on your laptop and make it faster to recover the data. The scary part, of course, is who else can see it? Where is it being stored? Who can access it? And what happens if you're accessing secure data that you need to have protected? For example, the high security block within NZQA, or your student assessment data, your student health data, discipline records. Do we really want copies of this being recorded and snapshotted and then stored for later reference? There are some definite concerns with things like that. The Copyright Act is another powerful tool for us. In New Zealand and Aotearoa, immediately that you write something, you own the copyright to it. With the copyright, you have exclusive rights to decide who can copy it, who can publish it, who can communicate your work, who can perform it or read it in public, and who can make an adaptation of it. And this poses a real challenge for us when we start looking at how we use an artificial intelligence, because If we come along and use a tool like Summarize, well, who are we sharing that with? If it's our personal use for it, then you're probably fine. But if you come along and make an adaptation of the work by summarizing it, reducing it, and then sharing it across your intranet with everybody else, you're probably in breach of the Copyright Act. We do know that we have a copyright license that we can use within schools, but how much of that is applicable to the use of artificial intelligence isn't clear. And particularly because the copyright license is designed for us using the materials within our school framework, we probably are not likely to be able to hand this out via an artificial intelligence unless your school has invested in building their own artificial intelligence and is strongly protected within a walled garden. So that does raise those questions about, do we have permission to share it? Are we adapting it and changing it? And then are we uploading it to an AI from there? The last of the 3 acts that's really significant for us is the Harmful Digital Communications Act. And the Act's purpose is to deter, prevent, mitigate harm caused by individuals or caused to individuals by digital communications, and to provide the victims of harmful digital communications with an effective means of redress. When we look a bit deeper into it, digital communications is any form of electronic communication, and it includes text messages, writing, photographs, pictures, recordings, and other matters that are communicated electronically. So this brings artificial intelligence quite squarely into the middle of this, because we can use artificial intelligence for a lot of these elements. There are 10 principles within the Harmful Digital Communications Act about what you should not do, and it's disclosing sensitive facts, being threatening, intimidating, menacing, grossly offensive, indecent or obscene, harass an individual, make a false allegation, breach confidence, incite or encourage harm, incite or encourage suicide, and denigrate people because of race, religion, color, etc. If we look at the ones that immediately leap out, disclosing sensitive facts, breaching confidence, and potentially the denigration of people because of race, religion, and color, when we're seeing bias coming through, are major issues. But also coming along and having the deep fakes, making copies of people potentially in a form of undress, even if it is artificial, is a major concern that will probably fit into either the grossly offensive or the indecent or obscene. So we've got a legal framework to build on that we do need to be aware of. From there, we can actually look at our different posts, so the structure that we're having in place for us to look in a framework going through. So Manaaki is obviously about care, respect, and looking after people. And in this element within there, what we're looking at is, are we having an ethical or moral approach? Is it supportive and respectful? Are we valuing different perspectives? Are we enhancing mana by our use of this? We have a series of questions that we ask, and then you give each of the questions a 1 to 5 rating. So by the end of asking the questions about these key points, you're getting a general feeling about overall, where does Manaaki fit into the use of this artificial intelligence? Is it something that is supportive and caring, or is it potentially the opposite of that? Is it bringing people down? Is it reducing their mana? We add those into a spidergram, so we get a nice picture of where we're sitting in this. And by the time we've gone through all 4 of the PO, you get a really good perspective about the strengths and potential weaknesses of the artificial intelligence you're looking at. When we look at ARCAI, we're obviously looking and focusing on our ability to teach and to learn. This is where we also take a little bit of a sidestep and think about the SAMR model that Dr. Ruben Pentagura came up with, which is looking at how we would structure and how we're using different techniques in artificial intelligence and what we're using them for. So the model starts with substitution, which is simply a direct substitution, one for the other. So if we went into a product like Microsoft Word or Apple's Pages and did a spelling or grammar check, this is a built-in function. We can do the same thing in an artificial intelligence. Substitution is one for one here. The second stage is augmentation, where by doing this, we can now start to get slight functional improvements. Now, an obvious one for this is providing feedback to students on their tasks. Well, this is something that we can use artificial intelligence for. It's also something that we can do ourselves. It's potentially quicker if we're using an AI for it, but it's not a huge step forward. The third stage is modification. This is where we've significantly redesigned the task, and this is where we're starting to see things like personalizing and differentiation of instruction and approaches so that our assessments and our learning is markedly different. This is a transformational level approach. This is where we're really starting to get some of the immense benefits out of artificial intelligence. And then the last stage is this idea of redefinition, where we're able to do things we've never been able to do before because of this tool. The ability to very quickly bring multiple data sources and mediums together to produce a product, to process vast volumes of data and do it incredibly quickly so that we're getting a really, really positive outcome. We only have to look at things like Google's latest video tool, VO3, where this has now managed to sync not only the virtual player, the virtual performer in there, but also their speech and their facial movements to the point that you can actually lip read the AI. This is an immense step forward, and the capability is brilliant. So you can have a virtual presenter who is incredibly realistic. So that's the SAMR model. Now, we're going to use it a little bit later as well when we start thinking about the energy cost of doing and using artificial intelligence, because if we're only doing low-level stuff, we probably don't want to be doing it just because of the immense cost it takes on the environment for AI to work. Once we started to think about that, we then also start looking at the rest of ARCAI. So are we being purposeful in our use of this, or is this just something a little bit like our latest search engine? Oh, instead of Googling it, go and look it up on ChatGTP or Perplexity or Claude or whatever your artificial intelligence of choice is. What's the evidence that's guiding our practice and our behavior? Are we being agile in our approach to it? And is our artificial intelligence also equally agile with us, so it's adapting to our needs? Do we have the facility to be collaborative? Is it something that is encompassing all of education, or are we actually looking at quite a narrow artificial intelligence that only addresses one subject area or potentially even one subject within the whole of the school? Is this a form of innovation, or are we just hopping on a bandwagon? Can we use this for critical thinking and also for reflective practice? And again, we give it a 1 to 5 rating on all of those, bring that through and add that back in. It's interesting at this point as well that it raises this idea of what do we need to do in terms of teaching our kids about artificial intelligence. So Sam Altman has said recently that Just saying things like please and thank you is costing ChatGTP millions and millions of dollars in power cost, because every time you add another word, another node into a string that you're processing, it has to go and look at that and reference it and build up a context for it. So each of these nodes adds more and more complexity to it. So we obviously have to do some work with our students and ourselves in how we go and engineer prompts and how we reduce the unnecessary elements to save the planet a little bit of power. One of the things we have done is produce some resources like this. So this is one on refining prompts, looking at the different command terms and what's a process going through there. Within AcademyEx, we also can look at some of the guidance that we've received from New Zealand Qualifications Authority. So they have provided us with some elements on what we need to think about in regards to our level 1, level 2, our level 3 students. What they've said is that the work must be authentic, it must be a reflection of the student's own knowledge and efforts, and artificial intelligence cannot replace original thinking. Any use of AI must be transparent. They should be able to explain how they're using it and also acknowledge that they have used it. Assessment must have a degree of academic honesty in there, so AI-generated content cannot be used and submitted as the student's original work. So it's maintaining that integrity within there. The one that seems to be affecting a lot of schools, and it's one where we're also developing a template as a policy to be able to share, is that all schools in Kura must have clear shared policies on what is acceptable artificial intelligence use. So we now have a ministry guideline that says this is what we must do. What is critical in all of this, though, is the professional judgment of the teachers and providing an assessment of authenticity by using things like versioning, checkpoints, observation, discussion with your students, so that you actually have a very good idea of where they're going and how they're going. When we look specifically into the National Certificate for Educational Achievement, NZGTTA, it is obviously more restrictive. It's not out of the context of using it for teaching and learning, but when you come around to actually using it for an assessment, it is way more specific from that. The acceptable level of use for internals is based on the standard itself. So from a technology perspective, if you have something that says you are planning a solution, you cannot use an artificial intelligence to start developing the planning. If you're evaluating it, you cannot turn around and use the artificial intelligence to do your evaluation for you. So the writing within the standard actually gives you a great deal of guidance as to what you can or cannot do. There is a blanket statement, which is there is no use of artificial intelligence in externals. When we have the internals, the final evidence must reflect the student's own work. AI tools are to be used for support but not completion. They're permitted in limited ethical ways, providing the teacher verifies the authenticity by using checkpoints like draft stages, oral questions, in-class processes, versioning, and the like. So we do have some very useful guidance from NZQA on this. And again, we ask a series of questions, bring them all together, and then get again an overall mark for that, add that one in. The concept of panongana, this po, is about truth and honesty. And it links back into our legal aspects, so we would be considering things like our Privacy Act, the Harmful Digital Communications Act, copyright, but also it asks some questions about transparency. What is happening to our data? How is it stored? Where is it stored? What accountability is there? Does the product show integrity? We bring all of these together to try and make an overall judgment for wānanga. And then finally, the last of our po is kaitiakitanga. And this brings us to this whole idea of how much power is being used by an artificial intelligence. And it's one of the areas that I find amazing and incredibly frightening, because the level of power usage is beyond anything I had imagined. The RAND Corporation came up with a really interesting report, and they were looking at the capacity for the United States to maintain the data centers that currently exist in there within there into the future. And a lot of this is actually based on the power consumption. And they got a range of different estimates as to how much power is going to be used. And they brought these together. I've simplified it a little bit in that I thought we'll put it into something that we can understand quite easily at a glance. And essentially, if you have one little nuclear reactor symbol, that's 1 gigawatt of power production. And if you have a large nuclear reactor symbol, then that's 100 reactors, around about 100 gigawatts of power. Now, at this point, it's probably important to note that for US power production, around about 1/3 of power production comes from nuclear plants. The other 2/3 are spread across renewables like hydro, wind, solar, and also oil and coal burning stations that are there for generating power. If we look at 2020, the total usage of data centers, including AI data centers, in terms of power was 0.4 gigawatts for the year. By the time we got to 2023, we had a tenfold increase up to about 4.3 gigawatts of power. Sounds reasonable. 2025, we were sitting at 21 gigawatts of power. Now, 21 gigawatts of power, I'm sitting here going, I'm not quite sure what that actually means. So when I did a little bit of research into it, to put it into context, in 2023, New Zealand produced the sum total of 9.9 gigawatts of electricity for the entire year. So the 21 that we are using now is twice the capacity of New Zealand to produce electricity. By 2027, it is estimated that it's gone up to nearly 70 gigawatts. And then by 2030, we're looking at about 325 gigawatts estimated power use. Now, this is significant when we put it in the context of the US, because the total US power production in 2025 was around about 1,200 gigawatts of power. That's a large proportion of the potential power coming through for 2030 being used. The US has predicted its growth in power stations to be 160 gigawatts. That still gives them a shortfall of about 150 gigawatts of power. Now, that is having all sorts of roll-on implications. We're already seeing in places like Ohio, because of the level of usage of power stations, the average monthly power bill has gone up by $20 per household per month. When we start to get this increased growth and demand, we can extrapolate out that the cost of power is going to go up even more. Now, when we look at the actual AIs themselves, we have a whole stack of these chipsets or these GPUs dropped into artificial intelligence. This is a NVIDIA H100 chip. It is the current cutting edge artificial intelligence GPU, graphical processing unit. It's phenomenally powerful. They roll in at about $30,000 each. And if we look at ChatGPT 4.5, we need around about 30,000 of these to produce a production level AI. So the ChatGTPs, the Perplexities, the Claudes, Anthropic, the whole lot are using huge numbers of these. Now, the production cost alone just in GPUs is $900 million. And that's not the frameworks, that's not the CPUs, that's not the storage. That is nothing other than just the GPU cost. So we have a vast investment, which again brings us back to Thomas Harris. If you're not paying a subscription for your product, then you are the product. The estimation, though, is that by the time we're getting through to the 2030 frontline frontier model artificial intelligence, it's gone from not 30,000 of the H1 equivalent chips, but to 14 million of them. And we're looking at about a $64 billion foundation cost for building an AI. That is enormous on top of the power requirements as well. Just to train that, you are looking at nearly 10 gigawatts of power just to train the one AI. So we've got a whole stack of concerns coming through to do with power. And this is why the likes of Google are building power centers right by their data centers. And they're coming along and they've gone and made a partnership with Kairos Power for small, portable, 0.5 gigawatt nuclear power stations that they can pick up and drop in a paddock next door to a data center. It's why Microsoft is currently looking at reopening 3 Mile Island, because that way it has its own data center, or own power supply that it can use for its data centers. And this raises that question as well about our SAMR model. The environmental cost of even the smallest of actions that we are taking on an AI vastly outstrip what we would be doing in a normal approach to something. So if we're using it as our new search engine of choice, the environmental cost is considerably higher. There are estimations that every query we're putting through is taking up about 6 or 7 liters of water to cool all the CPUs and the GPUs to a sufficient level that they can go and process it. So there are some really big concerns about what should we be doing at that lower level of substitution augmentation, and should we only be reserving our AI use for that modification and redefinition, the top end stuff that isn't having an enormous and disproportionate environmental impact. When you put all of those together and then you start bringing in as well things like data sovereignty, the security, equity, and eliminating bias, as well as our issues with academic honesty, we start to get that whole picture of kaitiakitanga, of guardianship, about protecting our environment, protecting our people, protecting our taonga, so that we're looking at that amazing gift that we have in Te Reo Māori that we need to protect, and managing that with our data sovereignty. We know as well that NZQA is finding there are more and more breaches coming through of artificial intelligence and external assessments. We drop that in, and then we start considering all of these different factors. And if we have something that is low benefits and high risk, well, we probably need to reject it. If we have something that is low risk, but also of low benefit, it's superficial, it's a little bit of a juvenile pop-up, then probably a superficial use means we don't want to use that either. If it's high risk, but potentially high benefit, then potentially we might go for cautious use. But our goal is something that is low risk, but high benefit, something that we've considered has the maturity of a product, has the policies to support it, has the ability to be supported and managed within the schools, and then also that's going to provide us with a really solid, stable, useful base. And if we can get those two, we're in a really cool spot. We do also need to consider a couple of other things. right across our school, how are we going to go and deliver this? What is our approach that is going to be a whole school approach for our use of artificial intelligence? I'm in a K to 13 school. So how do I address my youngest learners right the way to my senior learners? If we're in a full primary, how are we going right the way through to the end of year 7? What are we teaching our students about this? And if we're in a full secondary from year 7 to year 13, how are we matching that up? How are we looking at a continuum going through? Is all of our leadership aligned to this? Is this a short-term or a long-term fix? Is this something we're jumping on the bandwagon because everybody else is using it? Or are we looking at what in the future can we go and do? How do we consistently implement it? And probably the hardest one of all, how do we build AI literacy across our staff and our students, but also inform our whānau about it as well, because they need to know about what's happening in school and why their son or daughter may or may not be able to use these tools. It is about asking the right questions. To support us in schools, we've got things like the traffic light system. We've got some guidance about how we can go through and plan and apply these tools, how we can refine our prompts, how we can validate our prompts, and also some guidance and support for teachers on how they can go through and validate student work. And ironically, the use of digital tools like things like Turnitin are one of the last elements that we will be using because they really, really struggle to keep up and identify artificial intelligence developed content. We have the framework itself, and then we have some other really useful resources from our partners. So a collaboration between AUT, University of Canterbury, and AcademyEx has developed the Scaffolded AI Literacy Framework for Education, the work of Catherine McCullen, David Parsons, and Massey, all of whom have gone through and built this amazing framework about AI literacy that we can download and extract information from. If we go and have a look at the work of Professor Simon McCullen out of Victoria University, he's done a lot on preparedness of school leadership for artificial intelligence. He's also produced some AI policies that you can adapt to. UNESCO has produced a series of resources that are useful for both teachers and students in terms of what are the competencies that they need. There are online courses that are available. So Microsoft, Google, a lot of the players are out there actually producing courses that teachers can come and use that are designed to support us in our process going forward. And then NZQA has a number of resources out there, guidance on acceptable use of artificial intelligence, the effective assessment practice guide, and a general guideline for generative AI that are very useful tools for us to go through and use. To finish off, if we look back a few years to 1943, Thomas J. Watson, the then president of IBM, famously said, "I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers." He got that one wrong. And we really have no idea where this is going to go. We know it's going somewhere. We know it's going somewhere quite fast. But the reality is that the best way to predict the future is, as Alan Kay said, to invent it. And if we can go and do that, then we're going to get the best possible outcome for our learners and ourselves. Now, if you've got any questions about this, you can contact myself or Tracy Henderson, and we're more than happy to support you as much as we can. So feel free to contact us. Thank you very much for listening.